So essentially, I'm going to do this. There's PowerPoints posted for Chapter 10, but I have just found in the past that it's easier for me to actually explain the concepts using Smartboard or transparencies or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and just give an introduction as to what standard costing is. I'm going to talk about how we set standard costs, and then I'm going to give you examples of what we do once we get the standard costs for a unit. What do we compare them to, and how do we adjust our business model from the information that we've gleaned? So that's basically what we're going to be covering. So again, a standard cost, the official definition is it's a budget for one unit. And we set standard costs for evaluation purposes. So everything really that we're doing in this entire class is geared towards helping us manage our business more adeptly. And again, when we were doing the master budgeting, we were kind of looking at big picture stuff. Now we're going to be really dialing it in at the micro level and assessing how we're doing controlling costs at the per unit basis. So, and just to kind of wrap it all together, master budgeting and standard costing aren't mutually exclusive processes. This is all kind of wrapped into one big process, even though in our book it's arbitrarily put into chapters. So once we set our standards, and again, when are we going to do this? Before, during, or after the actual cycle we're talking about? This is an estimate before, right? It's like the predetermined overhead rate or the budgeting process, right? This is prior to a period that we're actually talking about. And this is not new. You've heard this many times. Then we figure out, then we look at what actually happened, and obviously that occurs when? During, right? And then we get to the end of the process, and what are we going to do? You're going to have to compare them, aren't you? Variance. So you actually calculate the variances, and then you do assessment after. And then the whole process starts again, right? You may be using the same standards over and over and over if you find that they're accurate. But if you've got, like, for example, a heavily energy-intensive product, right now the price of oil, I mean, has been pretty steadfastly dropping, hasn't it, for 6 months? So you're probably reassessing your standards around, energy costs, which is an element of overhead. So things like that. Okay, so there's two, let's just kind of back up and talk about how do I set my standards. There's two theories or schools of thought about how we set standards. One is ideal capacity, and one is normal capacity. Does green not work? Ideal capacity is everything's operating at absolute optimal conditions. So when I'm calculating my overhead rates and my direct materials rates, there's no waste, there's no breakdown, there's no calibration periods. My employees are highly efficient at all points in time. It's everything's running at optimal capacity. Or you can use the school of thought normal capacity, which is obviously much more practical. And that basically says, I'm acknowledging in my standards that sometimes people come into work and, they've got a cold. And so they're not producing at 100%. They're producing at 70%. And sometimes machines break down. and everybody sits around while maintenance comes in and recalibrates. Obviously, based on the picture I just painted, this, in my mind, sends a message, because also, just let me say this, back up, many organizations will bonus based upon variance calculations. So y'all are producing, name whatever, monitors or microchips or heart implants for me, and we've got strict quality control, we've got guidelines, I know how long it should take, I know how much, my overhead should be, my materials should be, and y'all just aren't performing, you're wasting materials, things aren't passing QC, my overhead's out of control, so I calculate all my variances after, and it's like, sorry, I mean, there was a 3% pool I was hoping to distribute, but that's not going to happen. So keeping that in mind, how are you going to feel theoretically when I, as the management team, am making a decision on which of these to use, right? I mean, clearly it's fairer or more equitable for you to be using the normal methodology, right? Or for me to be. Okay, so back to the variance analysis. So this is basically talking about the strategies for setting standards. And the next thing is when I actually calculate the variances, and we've talked about this when did we talk about this? Oh, with flexible budgeting. And I'll just tell you right now, I'm going to have 6 different variances that I calculate. Am I going to dig in and analyze every single one of them in incredible depth? Right, so what's the question? Yeah, does anybody remember what that word is? It depends upon how far off the variance is. Oh, what'd you say? Materiality, exactly. It's the issue of materiality. How material is it to making a decision? And we do this, we use materiality every day in our lives, we just don't call it that. Right? If something's utterly and completely unimportant and doesn't impact how we make decisions or our social interaction or our financial decisions, that's immaterial to us. If your boss comes and says, I'm going to give you a 3-cent an hour raise, that's immaterial. Give you a $3 an hour raise, that's material. So in standard costing, it's got a fancy term, even a fancier term than materiality, but it really is the concept of materiality. And it says we only, not identify, but we only pursue, that's a P, funny, we only pursue variances using a model called MBE, Management by Exception. So management by exception says the variance was outside of a parameter, pre-established parameter. And a parameter is just what Jess and G were talking about. It's 2%, it's 4%, it's 8%, right? So I'm not going to even look at any of my variances unless they're outside of that materiality parameter. And you know, in a decentralized organization, the employees determine those parameters along with the management team. Like we all think, hey, if our material costs get outside of 5%, that's material. We better take a look at that. We better analyze the variances. So that's called management by exception. Okay, so each standard cost for one unit, as we said, is a budget for one unit. And there's two pieces. Well, what are the three things that go into any product? Yeah. Direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. Right, it keeps popping up. So if you were trying to establish, say that you manufacture synthetic oil for racing cars, and you were trying to figure out how much direct materials go into every, what do we buy not gallons? Cans of oil, I don't know, 16 ounces? Quart? Oh, quart, thank you, that's what they are. Quarts of oil. What are the two components that you're going to be concerned in when you're trying to figure out how much material should go in there, cost-wise? Well, I'm just trying to figure out, like, how much cost of direct materials is in a quart of oil?
Well, there's the oil itself.
Yeah, so you want to know the raw material itself, right? Right? How much goes in and what does it cost? And really, it's the same here, isn't it? How much labor goes in? And with manufacturing overhead, it's really same thing, quantity times cost, but we call quantity for manufacturing overhead as our activity driver, right? Is it based on machine hours? Is it based on labor hours? Is it based on, those would be the two logical ones here. And I'm guessing that this is a pretty machine-intensive process. I don't see people hand filling. I see it very machine-intensive, so it's probably going to be based on machine hours. So, i.e. activity driver. Times, and what do we call that again? We've got our activity driver. What do we multiply that by to get the overhead? Yeah, that rate, that predetermined overhead rate. I'm just going to call it rate. And actually for direct labor, this is called rate as well. Right? What rate do I pay my people? So interchangeable terms. So I'm going to just kind of go through an example of manufacturing backpacks, and we're going to talk about what the input costs are. We're going to figure out what the standard cost is for one backpack, and then we're going to take a look at what it actually costs me to make backpacks at a flexible budgeting run. In other words, I thought I was going to make 100,000 backpacks. I made 140,000. We know then that we have to look at what the standard cost would be at 140,000 level, right? So let me just put up some basic data. So I'm making it's kind of those like little micro backpacks they have out now, and I think they're an offshoot of the Camelback. And let's say that to make my backpack, I think for my standard cost that it should take 2 pounds of raw material. And that I pay $7 for each pound. So I should technically have $14 of raw material costs in each backpack, right? Standard cost, direct materials. Also being aware, of course, that this isn't really fair because you're going to have a number of direct materials. You're going to have some sort of zipper. You're going to have some sort of, waist strap. Those are all your direct materials. Your standard costing direct materials card is going to be much more complex than I'm showing here. I'm just pretending like there's just one product. And we produce 100,000 backpacks. At a cost of $152,000. So all I want to do in this very simple first example is have you calculate for me what the total direct materials variance is. No. This should say 10,000 backpacks. So I actually run 10,000 backpacks, and my direct materials costs were $152,000. And all I want you to do in this first kind of simple exercise is tell me what you think the total direct materials variance is. That's going to be the difference between what and what? The actual and the total standard, yep. $10,000. So really it's just the difference between actual and standard, right? So how much did I actually spend? How much should I have spent? Right? 10,000 backpacks times 14 bucks each. So if we were looking at this at the end of a month, we'd say, oh, we had what, favorable or unfavorable direct materials variance? Unfavorable. I spent 12 grand more than I should have, right? Do you know from the information here whether this $12,000 is attributable to the price I paid for my raw material or the amount that I made or some combination thereof? Do you know that, though, from this information? Is it possible maybe I paid less for the material than I should have and used more? Like, in other words, that they netted against each other? Sure. We have no idea, do we? All we know is that we spent $12,000 too much. Do you think that according to the principles of MBE that this would bear looking at? Yeah, I mean, 12 grand into 140,000, I can see right there, that's almost 10%, isn't it? So yeah, that looks pretty significant. So you're going to need more information on this, right, to dial in and see what piece of this is price and what piece of this is quantity. Okay, I just wanted to paint a broad sweep here. All right, let's look at another example. Let's look at producing, I produce basically pallets. Okay? So, and it's a byproduct that many lumber mills will produce pallets because you get to use subgrade wood and scrap wood. And I put together these crates, these pallets. And basically, here's what my data shows me. So the first thing is that my standard materials are as follows. Well, what do you want to ask me? How much materials for one crate? And I think it's going to take 20 board feet of lumber. And sorry, and the cost. And because it's scrap and really basically waste wood, I'm getting it for 27 or for a dime per board foot. So you can easily see how much material should be in one crate. How much material should be in one crate. $2, right? 20 times 0.1, yeah. So just to reinforce terminology here, these are the standards that I set. I probably met with my production engineers. I met with my purchase manager, right? Found out, what is it that I can actually procure this for? It's a dime a board foot, 20 board feet of lumber to make the predetermined pallet size. Those are pretty standard. They all fit on the same forklifts and packing containers, and it's pretty standardized. So it's $2 a crate. So what's the next thing you want to ask me? So I set the standards, and then what happens? Then I go down the road and I actually produce, right? And so what happened next, the next set of data, is I actually produced 1,000 crates. And I used 19,500 board feet. And I've made a purchase of 23,000 board feet for, I got to get my second on here. It's 23,000 for $2,415. Now, we need to talk about a couple of things here. One is, why would I have made a purchase order for 23,000 if I only, how many did I think square feet should I have used to produce this run? 20,000, right, obviously. 20 board feet times 1,000 crates. I should have used 20,000 board feet. Why did I go purchase 23 then? Maybe I have to over-purchase, yeah, because it's reclaimed wood, it's that quality. I know X% is going to be waste. Yeah, do we always just go out and buy exactly what we need for a run, or do you sometimes want a little wiggle room, right? Or maybe that was the cutoff where I got a better price. For 23,000, you get a discount of 2% or whatever, okay? My point is that for this, and this is the only one of the 6 variances that this is true about, but, and it's hard to start with this one because it is the only one that's an anomaly, but your quantity for the variances are different if you used and purchased different amounts. So I'm going to, I know, it's like, really, it's Monday. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. What cartoon is that where the teachers, yeah. So, I mean, I sometimes even hear my own self sounding like that. So let me try and make this relevant one more time. We're gonna need to look at the variances here. So let's just back up a sec.
What are the 6 variances?
So the 6 variances were these guys, basically, that I just put up here. You're going to have a quantity variance for direct materials. You're going to have a cost variance for direct materials. You're going to have a quantity variance and a rate variance. And I mean, they're not exactly called these, but they're the exact same things for each element. So if you use exactly what you were supposed to use, awesome. There is no quantity variance. If you were more efficient and went under, you've got a favorable variance. If you have waste and went over, you have an unfavorable variance. Price, you paid the same, great, no variance. You paid less, favorable. You paid more, unfavorable. And same for each of them. So let's go back and tell me what you think the overall variance is. Just like we did up here with the backpacks. What's my total materials variance? And first you got to figure out how much I paid for each foot. How much should I pay for each board foot? 10.5 cents. Good. So you got to figure that out first. Sometimes that'll be given, sometimes not. But 24.15 divided by 20. No, price per foot. Yeah, 24.15 divided by 23,000. Right. I paid 10.5 cents. So I should have spent $2,000 to make them for materials. So, and then how much did I actually spend? Yeah, I spent, I bought 19,500 board feet. $10.5 I spent 2,000, let's just round it, and $48, right? Favorable or unfavorable variance? Yeah, I spent more than I should have. Unfavorable direct materials variance of 48 bucks. If you were using management by exception, would you look into this? Yeah, figure the percentage. Yeah, it's like 2.4%. May or may not be looking into it. But for argument's sake, let's say we're really tightly trying to control our materials variances, so we have, a zero tolerance for deviation from materials. Now, I'm going to put up a couple formulas. You're going to want a page of just the formulas for the variances, and it's going to kind of be like, wah, 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 wah. So I'm just preparing you for that, but we will go over and over them, and hopefully they'll go from just being formulas to making sense. Yeah, I'm going to show you that. So on your page, it's just going to say standard costing variance formulas. And so for materials, you're going to have two variances. It was just what I wrote up there, right, which was quantity and cost. And they're called quantity and variance, or quantity and price. And the quantity variance is calculated by taking your actual quantity times actual price minus standard price. And this hopefully probably is not going to make a ton of sense quite yet, but the quantity, which is what I was saying earlier, this is the only variance where you have a different AQ between these two formulas. The quantity here is how many materials you used. Your price, and you can see, oh, no, that's not right. No. Sorry. I've got these upside down. Okay, so I know you can't do this in your notes. Sorry. So let's just, I guess you're going to just cross out quantity and write price. And here's how you remember this. Sorry. Whatever the variance is you're trying to analyze, that's what you isolate in the parentheses. So your quantity for your price variance, your AQ equals how much you purchased. And here your AQ is how much you used. And this is the only variance I can promise you where you've got two different actual quantities. And right now I'm just going to write it down, but I'm going to hopefully make it more relevant as we go on. Okay, so then your quantity variance, you're going to isolate your quantity in the parentheses because that's the name of the variance, and that's how I remember. So whatever the name of the variance is, that's what goes in the parentheses. So let's see if we can make these, if we can do these formulas. So for our price variance, we're going to use the amount that we actually purchased or used. For our price variance, purchased is the only, because if I purchased a whole bunch more than I used, the price that I paid for it, that's where the variance is locked in, right? What if I bought 2.3 million board feet, right? So my variance is locked in at point of purchase. What was my actual quantity? Everybody look at the data, take a moment. The quantity I purchased. What did I actually pay for each of those board feet? We figured that out, right? 0.105. What should I have paid? Just a flat dime, right? Go ahead and figure out what my price variance was then at point of purchase. Okay. So am I going to have a favorable or unfavorable variance? I paid 0.005 per board foot too much, right? How much was it? How much? So, and let's just round. That's not what I got. Time. Paid $115 too much, didn't I? Based on what we just did, do you feel like you could do the quantity on your own? I want to know what was my standard price, and then, but this time the quantity isn't what I purchased, it's what I used. I took 0.105 minus 0.1, which gave me 0.005 times 23,000 board feet. Is that what you got? Did you get $50? Good thing or bad thing? Or in other words, favorable or unfavorable? Yeah, I used less than I was supposed to. Now, here's what's so screwy about the materials variances that isn't going to hold true with the labor or the overhead, is if your quantity purchased is different from your quantity used, you can't add these together to get the total. You know, the other variances, you can add the two elements together and it's going to come to the total. But 115 and 50 when they net is $65, and that wasn't what we calculated for the total, was it? And the reason, being is I purchased and used different amounts. So obviously mathematically they're not going to net to the same total number. Do you want to ask me any clarifying questions? Obviously, we're going to go over this a ton, but I just want to get some of these up on the board. Can I move on to the labor variances? I know you're just sitting on the edge of your chair. Okay, what do you want to ask me about the labor costs?
How many hours per unit?
Yep, how many hours per unit and
How much cost per hour?
how much, what's their rate? How much do I pay them an hour? So my standards for direct labor $9 an hour, and it takes 0.5 of an hour for 1 unit. And for those 1,000 crates, so that's the standard, for those 1,000 crates, my actual labor costs were $3,928. For 480 hours. So the first thing I want you to figure out for me is my total labor variance. How much was I off from what I should have been? And then we'll do our variances. How much should I have spent? How much? 4,500, right? $1,000 times 450. Favorable or unfavorable total labor variance? Favorable by 572? So should you just be excited about this and stop and go no further? Why not? Okay. The thing is, you've got to kind of use this in conjunction with this. What happened to my quantity of my materials? And I guess that doesn't really tie in this case because I had a favorable quantity. But a lot of times when you'll see like a favorable labor variance, they've been working too fast and not being efficient with the materials. So my point is, do you just stop here and go, oh, that's great, we saved money on labor?
How much was returned due to bad labor?
Right, you would definitely want to look at your warranty work and your quality control. But the point is, do you know from just looking at the 572 whether this is price or quantity? No. So I'm going to put up the next two variances, and then I'll have you work those for Wednesday. Do you know how much they paid an hour?
Yeah.
Well, you've got to figure it. I didn't tell you. $3,928 for 480 hours. You can figure out the rate. Okay, so the two variances, and I will tell you now, the rest of these, you guys, the two variances are going to explain the total. In other words, they're going to net to the total. It didn't happen on materials because my actual quantity was separate. So my first variance is price or rate. And the second one is quantity, which with labor is called efficiency. How many hours did I use? So it always is price and quantity. It's always the same two things. They just have different names. And it's exactly the same, you guys. What am I going to have inside the parentheses if I want to figure out the rate difference? Very good. That's called rate. This is what goes inside my parens, right? And for my efficiency, what do I want inside the parentheses? Yep, quantity, exactly. Okay, go ahead and we'll start class on Wednesday by taking a look at those, and then we'll finish our example with the overhead variances. So the mean on the exam was 70. which is I think, what was the mean on your first test? 68? 2 points higher. Yeah. So there's a 5-point curve on everybody's. So I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to look it over, and then we'll go ahead and talk about it.